Welcome to the Chris Rob Mac Show, where every week we talk about the latest AI news. We speak to AI founders and we discuss what it all means for us, for society, and for humanity. And really glad to see you guys back, Rod, Max. How are you, Max?
I'm feeling good.
Perfect. How are you, Rod?
Well, it has been a very eventful week. I'm doing fantastic. I'm always happy to be here.
Amazing. And this week we have another 3 topics. Today I thought it would be really cool to talk about AI in the music industry. We've spoken about other industries that are more also on the creative side. So let's also talk about music today. And then also we had touched upon Apple's partnership with OpenAI, and I think Ben Evans had a really good thought piece on the different ecosystems. So I want to talk a little bit about how Apple is taking that AI approach and how it's also maybe different from other players in the market. And then last but not least, just a couple of snippets of news that I thought was interesting to discuss, which is definitely Perplexity's infringement on copyright. And then also we've seen some funding rounds on AI in India. So with that, let's maybe kick off the show. And I want to start with the AI in the music industry. And I think the major question here is whether or not bigger record labels, as well as like artists, are actually embracing AI or are actually trying to protect themselves. And I think we've seen a couple of examples, and maybe I can kick it off. So we've seen a partnership with Universal Music Group that actually is building what is it called? A mic drop. At the same time, we've seen that they also have a lawsuit going with a couple of these records that are suing startups such as, I believe the name is Suno.ai, and essentially is a platform where you can put in a prompt, like, for example, a jazzy, I don't know, afternoon in Ibiza or something like that. And then you'd get the music created in an instant. And there's this lawsuit because these record labels believe that they infringed on some copyright and that the models must have trained on something, right? So we see that. And then I think the third use case we see is that also Spotify, one of the major players in the music space, is integrating new AI features. So for example, if the 3 of us were to go out tonight and we needed a playlist, then we would say, okay, hey, we want to go to a bar, we want to like get ready, get a drink or whatever. And then Spotify would actually create a playlist for us for that occasion. So that's really interesting. And maybe Max, let me start with you. What are your thoughts on that? Should the music industry embrace it or protect themselves?
I think with all sorts of technology, it really depends on the use cases. I was listening to what you just talked about around your Spotify creating playlists, etc. I still don't think it has arrived at that pinnacle of what we think LLM could do yet. In the sense that, hence, I think embracing it, understanding it, trying it makes a little bit more sense. Just how I think about it, because when it comes to creative, when it comes to, I guess, how the world works, any sort of technology embracement will help you to transition from where we are today to the future. At least that's how I think about it. I am not a creative myself, but there's the famous saying keep playing in my head. It's not AI that will replace your job, right? It's the person that embraces AI that will replace your job. I think that also applies to the creative industry. At least that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, at the end, it's about AI adoption, as we've talked about before. Rod, what's your take on that? How do you look at that?
I see this as, let's say, one of the greatest wars that is happening in the technology space, in that this really upending, AI is upending all the business models that we know historically on how to create content and monetize it. To be more specific, so here with music, historically, it was very easy to agree on copyright agreements because there were just a few radio stations, there were just like a few TV stations, so it was very easy to know, okay, where's MTV? With whom do I need to negotiate such that my artists can have their videos there? Because on one side, of course, the artists, the labels, they want to have distribution, they want that many people listen to it, and then they buy the songs, they go to the concerts, etc. But also on the other side, of course, they do not want that this is done for free. But it was very easy to identify all these players. Then we had something like YouTube that all of a sudden it allowed pretty much everyone to upload content. And of course, we had things like Napster and so on. That here was easy because there was only one player, that was Napster. So all labels could go legally after Napster until pretty much it went bankrupt, it disappeared, it failed. With YouTube, what happened was that instead they came to an agreement. in that the labels, the content creators, the copyright holders, they will provide digital signatures of their content such that when someone, random person somewhere on the internet, uploads a version of that, it will be easy to compare this to the original signature and take the content down. And it was also easy because there was only one player, which was YouTube. But now, with all that is happening in AI, where you have all the time new startups, projects, developers, and so on, well, now it becomes very, very difficult, basically impossible to say with whom do I need to be closing contracts, and also how will these contracts be respected. Now we need to go from a pure legal solution to a technical one to, for example, have some sort of either content protection, DRM of some sort, that if you do not have access to this content, then even if you download it, even if you are capable of seeing it in your browser, later when you send it somewhere else, it will be basically gibberish. So if it reproduces elsewhere, that is not in an authorized device, in an authorized browser.
Rod, this is very interesting, and maybe you can expand a little bit on the fact that you say, hey, now you don't even know who you should be contracting to. How does that relate to AI?
Well, it is because, so always, for example, when you're trying to be like a company on Sunday and then there is a technical challenge, the first thing that people suggest is, can you solve it through the legal way? Can you have some sort of agreement and so on, such that you don't need to develop this feature? But in the case of AI, what happens is that not the models themselves, but the data pipelines to fit these models, they do not really distinguish, they don't really respect any type of agreement. And also another thing that we had in our show repeatedly was like this need for more data in order to like train the models, to provide content and so on. We have discussed how in the case of, for example, like OpenAI for this video feature they want to launch, but it's not yet live, it was pretty much trained apparently with YouTube data, where most likely, of course, it was not done in agreement with Google. They just took it as it is. And like that, they're having reports from many companies where in the pursuit to have access to relevant sources of data, they just go and take whatever they can find, even if this means not respecting any type of copyright or having agreements with the owners of this creative work.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the infringement of copyright on different materials to actually get the model to do what it can do. And I think also in this case the exact opposite. You have UMG partnering with this company called Sound Labs, and then they have this voice cloning technology. And it actually reminds me that this is just an extension of voice technology in general that we also have seen. For example, there was this OpenAI I suppose lawsuit still going on with Scarlett Johansson that says, oh, well, you used my voice to train your different voice bots to, for the user. So I think we see that. And I think also we see that a lot of artists, I believe from Stevie Wonder to some other very famous artists, actually signed an open letter to urge the AI community not to continue with infringing on their IP. And I think from an artist perspective, it makes a lot of sense because I think in general, artists normally don't get so much royalty, and now they actually have to share it or actually someone else is using it. I think it also reminds me a little bit on the conversation that was going on the NFT technology, whereby in this particular case, let's say you would be able to mint an NFT for a song, and then if that song gets replicated, you can actually trace it back to the artist, which would be a really interesting way of making a new business model happening. I don't know, Max, what do you think about that?
When you were talking about that, that reminds me exactly about, the blockchain technology we're being used to track all the different IPs. And I think as you were talking about it, I was trying to think, what are the consequences here? The consequences is either your current music industry business model, which is charged by royalty, doesn't actually work in a world of abundance and technology where things are being mashed up to create something new. So if that happens, right, how will those business model change? Which means how will new value being created? How will those created the value start sharing value for themselves as well? I don't really know the output of that because I don't know the music industry very, very deeply. But I would love to have a conversation with someone from the music industry to see how this works. You could see that changing with the blockchain space, which is trying to track technical music from piece and trying to understand where is it distributed and therefore charge based on that. If I try to do that, right, because every time you stream a Spotify play, you kind of pass a royalty back to the musician, and that obviously creating a marginal cost for Spotify, but it's good for the artist, which is great. I think then if you have AI creating new content using someone else's knowledge as the ability to create this new content, how will that split be, right? I think to Rod's point, it's gonna get into both technical and legal battle. And the legal thing is a creation of human beings' contract, whereas the technical thing is more science, where technology could allow us to do that. That's I guess how I think about it at the moment, from utilizing different technology, battling IP tracking, and and business model within IP.
Another thing I was thinking is that, of course, it's very noble that some artists are so issuing letters saying, please, so don't destroy our livelihoods, don't destroy our business model, and so on. But up to a certain extent, it doesn't really depend that the AI company does it or not, because we have to understand how this works. Most of the time, it's not directly the company, the startup, whomever, going and then just taking so websites or songs or videos from the internet directly, because in itself, it's also a relatively complex task that is not, let's say, like a core competence of the company. So what happens is that they just use third parties. And then this is a little bit of like a bulk business where you pay by the number of website crawls, by the size of the data, and so on. And these providers, they're not necessarily in the most protected jurisdictions. They might not be the most reputed so players in the market, and so on. And as a result, they might resort to all type of shady tactics. So this becomes complicated, because then the startup, the company, needs to go and verify, hey, is my provider really complying? And we need to really look at the data, and then is this here something that might be protected, and so on. And in many cases, it's really impossible to discern where is really this data coming from, because the data is like stripped altogether, right? So we don't know anymore, is this like a New York Times article, or what is this? This is just some corpus, this is just some sound wave, and so on. So this would require that those who are ethical players, who want to abide by the rules, will need to develop some fail checks, some safety measurements, mechanisms, and so on, to track where the original source came from.
Definitely. And what you're alluding to, I think the main two takeaways for me in this whole conversation, or in the AI plus music industry, is really I actually believe down the road we will need to think about copyright, and there will be innovation, or they would require innovation also on the copyright, patent rights, an update on the legal front, in order to make data either more protected, or that the originator of that data gets rewarded, having their data be public and also be looked at by a robot or by AI. I think that's the takeaway number one. I think the takeaway number two, and we haven't really spoken too much about it in this conversation, but I think in a way, music is also getting democratized. And let me explain. I mean, we all love music. We probably listen to at least 50 songs per day, and we may not be the best musicians. And now with AI, you have the ability to just come up with songs and melodies and harmonies just with the power of one prompt. And to me, it just feels like there are a lot of opportunities for normal people that are not musicians to start actually getting into that space. And it reminded me of, okay, well, we had this first wave of Instagram images, right? And people would become these brand advertisers in the first step. And then YouTube came up, and you would, come up with videos, and you had really powerful video tools, and you would just cut and paste your video. And I think now with the rise of AI, you can actually make your own music and become a musician. And I think that actually will completely change the landscape of how this whole business model and value chain work in the industry.
And Chris, so here really to your point of, so normal people everywhere can create their own songs. So we have to think that this is pretty much, let's say, the next chapter from what was the precursor of DJs, sampling, electronic music, and so on, that has been around since the 70s pretty much. And already back then, it was also, where is the added value that the DJ is providing if the person is sampling from existing tracks, from existing voices, from existing recordings, and also how to handle the fact that the person is taking pieces of an existing song to create something new. So to whom should go the royalties, to whom should go the fame, the credits, etc., etc.
I think just to add to that, I mean, till today, I remember speaking to someone who is a musician. So her voice actually appears in some of the famous songs, but the problem is her voice actually belongs to a company in which she records with, and when that happens, which means she doesn't get any royalty. I think the democratization of it will probably give her some of the I guess, ability to claim that the voice is not entirely claimed by the company. I find it really interesting, right? It's like, it's a little bit like the Getty images, right? If you are an actor, you go into Getty images, you take some photos, Getty bought the images, so technically it's Getty's images, but it's your face. And one day when you walk down the road, it's your face all over advertising. How does that lie? Today, it obviously protects the person, the company that creates it, but not the person behind it. So how would that work as well? So I guess we'll only see. I think all in all, being able to create music as an individual, I think that will really opens up. I would say a new wave of information. It's a little bit like today's Twitter. Everybody becomes like a reporter, blogger. Everybody becomes a writer in a way. So
Max, totally right, and I love that analogy you're taking with Getty Images, and I think the takeaway really here is, okay, we have on the one hand side a technology that helps to democratize music making. On the other hand, obviously there's protection or embracing the technology for their own purposes, from like Sony Music to Universal Music Group, etc. And I think the takeaway here is that, yeah, data protection and copyright infringement, all that needs an update now that we live in this world where we have AI technology. Cool. Moving on to the second topic, we spoke about Apple signing a partnership with OpenAI, and obviously the question really is, what does that mean for maybe also us as consumers? How are we going to interact with our phones? Is there going to be a more powerful Siri, and where does actually OpenAI's capability integrate into the devices? And I thought Ben Evans' thought piece on that was very interesting. And the gist of it is basically Apple says, okay, OpenAI's a product like ChatGPT is not a product for us, but the way we look at it is it's a technology that enables different use cases. And so in the end, the user will not really feel that something is different, or there's this like huge button that you need to talk to or whatever. It's not taking the chatbot approach, but rather it actually integrates very seamlessly into the phone. So for example, the article says, hey, if you open your Apple mailbox, then you would have prioritized emails. And this is actually done by AI, by their own model actually, to say, okay, this content might be more interesting and more urgent than maybe another email. So when it comes to these personalized use cases, that is where Apple's model would fall in. And then if you have questions, like let's say we drink a wine, we talk about the world, and we want to know a historic event and when it happened, this would be a request that would be then sent to OpenAI or any other models, and Apple actually gives that to a third party, and it doesn't have any data on who you are or any user personalized information, but it's rather a world question. I thought that was very interesting. What are your takes on that? Maybe Rod, let's start with you.
Well, we can connect this to our previous episode where we're talking about how AI innovation is not impacting equally all players in the software industry, where we're saying that how NVIDIA valuation is exploding, is through the roof, and then something like Salesforce or any other SaaS player is pretty much stagnant. And what this is making is that those existing SaaS software businesses around, such as Salesforce, but also, for example, like Spotify could be another case, that were not created in the age of AI, need to think how can they integrate this functionality without having to create a complete new product or destroying their user base or their business model. And in the case of Apple, well, it is about how they can make use of the install base that they have of millions, hundreds of millions of very powerful end devices. And to be more specific, so instead of, for example, having a dedicated tool that will remove a background, or that you can prompt and say, include behind the background a tiger and maybe like some elephants, we go to Apple's image editor, like Preview or whatever it is that so it uses. And then there directly, there's now a button saying background remover. There is also a button saying, for example, include new objects into the background and so on. So then this way, they are refreshing, they're modernizing their existing software, they're adding this functionality, and they're keeping the users in the applications, because the other risk for all these players, especially those in the SaaS ecosystem, it is that the world becomes a simple input box, a text box, that there is no more go to Salesforce to do your CRM, but instead that it becomes go to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT has your CRM in the form of a prompt of where you just type, give me the last 10 leads that I should contact this week. And Then we don't interact with a dedicated interface, but everything becomes like a universal window that is just ChatGPT or Perplexity or any other AI provider.
I feel like Apple has the power to control the entire stack, right? They're already starting going down to making chip themselves. They're probably going to move up to owning a lot of the eventually currently commoditized solutions into their own model, for example. So what do I mean by that? So today, they started off Apple, they started off working with different providers, putting all the hardware together, built their own software on top, and then that was the product. And now, because they want to control more of the performance, eventually they went down the route of creating their own components to make it fit their use case better. Will they sell their chip down the line? We do not know, but at least we know now it works perfectly for whatever product they want to use. Number one. Number two, that means that if they're partnering with someone else on the AI model side, they're either number one trying to learn how the AI model works, which means that they will eventually build it themselves from their past experience. It sounds like it. Number two is that they believe at the moment it's more of a commoditized thing when it comes to the model. There's no reason to build it themselves, right? If someone else can do it better, why do it? So they're trying to take that approach. You're trying to see where the use cases could be when it comes to the LLM models. So that's one. Number two, then the question becomes, where are the use cases from an Apple's perspective? From Apple's perspective, I think Ben Evans written about this, right? Like in the 1974, if you want to do a spell check, it costs you like what $74 in order to buy a freaking spell check. Today, spell check is everywhere. Kind of just kill off the previous value add, the previous version of value add in other era will now be free. So then, I guess in my head is whatever it is being charged right now, what can it be free because of AI? So that is like a value add to your users. And the question is, why would they want to do that? Because Ben Evans again put together a number which I find interesting, which is the iPhone market is 400 billion, right? The PC market is like 200 billion, but the chip market today is what 25 billion, or Nvidia sold 25 billion of chips with 150 billion of data centers. So you can just see where the value truly accrue with the money. I guess number three, will they eventually partner with other model players out there? Maybe. Or will they just stick with the best or the biggest at the moment, ChatGPT, and eventually figure out what's the better way of doing it, and then they do it themselves? We don't know, because they did the same thing, right, with Intel with the chip, and eventually just run their own. At least that's how I'm thinking about it from the economics application perspective, and eventually it will feed into their entire ecosystem.
Having these devices, and so many of them, in the hands of the consumer is really the competitive advantage you have as Apple. And it's a very good and very genius way, I believe, how they have tried or started to integrate AI as a capability or technology within their devices. So it's really about enhancing these devices. And I think it makes sense if you look at the mobile phone market and you have a lot of different players from China or Asia in general that are competing with you. And you are, as Apple, really demanding a high premium for your phones. And I think it's almost like it needs to be in there. Maybe it also justifies a certain premium on the phone, on the iPhone. And I think this is a really nice example of a closed system and what you can do when you operate a closed ecosystem. And closed ecosystem means basically, if you want to do anything in the Apple world, you need to be on the App Store. You need to basically have corporations with Apple. So that's basically what it means to be a closed ecosystem. And the way, as you described it, Max, to try integrate in a very seamless way, in a very non-disruptive way, and at the same time learning how others are building these models is quite fascinating to me.
In the example of the spell checker, Chris, and now that Max was mentioning here with this spell checker from the 70s, this is still happening, and also connected to like this AI wave maybe a bit earlier. But we can think about Grammarly. Grammarly started as just a pure spell checker, grammar improvement, and so on, and it charges a significant amount, so just to use it. But you can see that today most of the functionality of Grammarly is integrated in Google Docs, in so Microsoft Word, and so on. And on one side, yes, the products are reasonable, but still Grammarly is able to carve a niche and continues to be a successful company with just this highly specialized product. So maybe here like the controversial question or just the food for thought is, maybe in the end, these hyper specialized products will become so attractive that people prefer that over the more generic ones, such as just having some AI features sparkle upon it, as is in the case as Apple's trying to do. or the fact, as you're describing, that the ecosystem of Apple is so heavy that people just stay inside and they do not resort to the specialized solution?
I think if I were to take that, it feels like, once again, it's like a barbell effect, right? You have people on both sides. You have people who are, if it's just generic, just normal spell check, you could just get that with your current ecosystem. That's perfect. It's almost like an expectation, as Chris was mentioning about, right? It's like, I paid a premium for this. I want to at least have some of that. However, on the other end, if you're a serious writer, instead of going to get an editor to help you edit everything that you write, it feels like solutions like Grammarly, which is a very specialized solution, might be able to help you. So I guess again, it really depends on the use cases as well as the user's appetite to onboard and onboard the solutions to do what they want to do. But will this persist? Is an interesting question, because software is about process, right? Getting from one end, helping you to figure out what the workflows are and spit out certain output. And AI, it's a little bit like an automated way of doing that, because they take in knowledge, they figure out where are the potential pathways, and eventually get to an output. So that like just continues as is. But from the adoption side, it's really on the use case, a little bit like barbell.
Definitely. And in other words, Rod, your point, I didn't even know that Gmail or any Google product is using Grammarly, but now it makes a lot of sense how they autocomplete stuff and autocorrect. But thank you for.
I don't know if they use Grammarly in the background, but they have Grammarly-like functionality, right? They integrated the product of Grammarly in their core product.
Got it. And I think it's interesting to see that a product is integrated in such a big common platform such as Google, and at the same time also lives on its own. To be seen. But I wanted to wrap up this show today with two news pieces and get your thoughts on that very quickly. And I want to start with the news on Perplexity infringing on copyright again. And maybe, Rod, tell us a little bit more about it and also your perspective.
So first, what is Perplexity? Perplexity is a search engine, or not a search engine, but just like an answering service that provides sources. So when you use ChatGPT or Claude or any other chatbot and you ask, so who was the first person in the United States, it will provide some answers, but who knows if it's true or not, right? Maybe it just invents things, it hallucinates, and so on. Perplexity, what it's trying to do is getting the results from the internet, summarizing them, and then when you ask this question, it will provide you the answer, a summary, together with the sources where it took it. So then you can see, okay, it came from the Wikipedia, it came maybe from the Britannic Encyclopedia and so on, and then you say, okay, this is reliable. I trust it. Now, however, what is happening with Perplexity, what is being accused of, is that on one side, it is taking content that it was not authorized to take from. So from news sources, from protected websites and so on. But also not only that, but it is crawling them without the permission or actually the explicit restriction from the news outlet, from the content source. So historically, the internet has worked with a little file called robots.txt. It's just a simple text file that outlines rules if the website should be indexed by search engines, and then which pages should be indexed, and what is the rules for each of these pages. It was a way for search engines like Google, Yahoo, and so on, those who were in the 90s, to just try and go and find this file, because every website will have it. You'll go to, let's say, so newyorktimes.com/robots.txt. There the rules will be, and then you will know what to do. And for the website, it was also efficient because storing data, compute, and so on was expensive. So then, as Google or Yahoo back in the 90s, it will be better to just know really which pages from this website from New York Times am I allowed to crawl and store. But this is not a legal agreement. This is not a technical restriction and so on. This is just, let's say, like a gentleman's agreement where I see this and I try to respect it. But nothing is stopping me from just crawling and scraping and storing the whole New York Times website without respecting anything. And this is apparently what is happening with the Perplexity. And just now we're talking about the topic of music and how they use maybe data providers that are respecting these rules. Perplexity, that is what it's claiming. They're saying, we didn't know this is happening because in fact, we are not crawling, we're not responsible for this data collection. On one side, because this is not ethical and also it infringes many copyright agreements and so on, to the point that, for example, AWS is investigating if Perplexity was using their services to do this, because in the AWS agreements, it's not allowed to do illegal activities, but also because it's technically challenging. So crawling the internet, keeping an index and so on, this is something that very few can do it, and it will not be part of, like say, like the core competence of Perplexity to do it. So on one side, they're claiming that they're like this better answering machine with very reliable sources, reputable and so on. But on the other side, they are taking this content, they are using it to provide answers, and very often they're not even crediting the source. So one of the core statements is we give you the actual original source. If I use New York Times, I'll show you what's taken from New York Times. But apparently this is not even happening.
So thank you, Rod, for this. And maybe just for the audience, I think very simplified. It's a website has some disclaimer saying, okay, you are not allowed to use my content. And basically Perplexity is like, well, we're going to ignore it and we're still going to summarize all the content. And here's also the source. But I think one very funny thing in that particular article about it said, well, Perplexity says they did not infringe on anything because they use third parties and they are infringing and we're just using their services, which I think is quite interesting. But anyhow, I think the second piece of news I thought was very interesting was on the AI space in India. And I think we always talk about the US and China, and sometimes we talk about Europe, but I think India has become this tech spot in very different technologies. And I thought it would be really interesting to look into it. And it seems funding is actually going down, while in the US, obviously, funding increased for AI. And so I was very curious, Max, as someone who is in the space of looking at startups, any interesting startups coming out of India? What do you say about this drop? What is your opinion on that?
Cool. I think very good point, right? Just to I guess give context to the listeners. I mean, the funding in AI startups in India dropped about 80% in 2023 to about 113 billion from 554 million in 2022. As compared to the US, which actually grew 211%, to 16.2 billion from 5.2 billion. I think the funding side of things, for me, it feels a little bit of a red herring. Simply because, yes, capital is required to push things to happen, but at the same time, it is the talent that requires to build stuff, right? Capital is just one way to catalyze the change. I think from an India perspective, if you look at where they are and how they've come so far, they practically were the processing, also, should I say business processing outsourcing places, where that eventually led to the creation of a lot of the, I would say, Indian companies, or I would say Indian talent that power a lot of larger companies. If you go to a lot of large companies today, I know for sure in the UK, a lot of large banks have huge operations that's out of India, which a lot of it are software engineering that are powering the existing applications that UK consumers are looking at, because they have to be able to do that from a cost perspective, sometimes from a competency perspective as well, because India just have that talent, be able to process stuff, turn things, getting any sort of input and turn into output that are, up to standard for whatever a large corporate is trying to do. And then from an AI perspective, because I feel like they have that knowledge from that perspective, it will now lead to a lot of usage using those AI, trying out different things on an AI perspective. I think overall, you would see a lot of all those AI talent either be working with larger corporates. That's why not necessarily in startup yet, because they don't have access to all of that yet, but via larger corporate, you might get that. And then the next wave, in my head, is that they will eventually come out and start their own thing. Hence, that's when you see the funding will pop up again. A lot of the funding on the West at the moment, they are trying to create solutions to sell to the corporate. If a corporate adopts it, a lot of those folks that are working in large corporates based out of India will start using them as well. And that's where new use cases will come. I guess that's one way of I see how those knowledge are being transferred from one place to another. Number two, and in my head, is about how big of a talent pool do they have and how big of an opportunity in India really is. I think in India, there are still a lot of folks that are trying to get online that may not necessarily speak English. And hence, there is a huge, language support required in order to get them on. But if we do get, India on, that would be a fascinating world, because then, you will have a lot of different culture, different knowledge that will then propagate. And hence, I guess from an AI perspective, that will also change how traditional model works, right? I don't think there's going to be one model that rules them all. You will have a specific model that targets a specific region in India. So from that perspective, it's already coming, right? India also services a lot of, I would say, the Western world with content writing, for example, with content editing. As technology propagates in that part of the world, a lot of their knowledge then will flow back into this part of the world because they are already doing the work. So I guess third thing, it's a lot on the political will of India. I think I'm a big fan of what the current prime minister have done, with India trying to raise it by building even payment infrastructure. The question that I have in my head is, will there be even more political will to absorb funding into that country, or to build their own, to then power civil services with AI? So it's not just the consumer that will be the big user of it, but it will also be the public services that will be a big user of it. This basically allows them to leapfrog what we're traditionally known, right? With payment system, like let's say in the UK and US, we're still very card based. But when you go to like places like Africa or Asia, it's very mobile banking based. So then will this happen with AI as well? I think it will, but they will find the right use cases to get there. So just to I guess really summarize it is number one, the knowledge and adoption flow, right, from the west to the east. Number two is around consumer, I would say to a certain extent talent. And then number three is around the government, political will to make this happen. So all in all, I think this is just the beginning. I don't see the funding news really affecting the underlying trend of skills moving to India and be able to turn that into something of value. And so, to a certain extent, I think in the article, they mentioned Lightspeed, which is one of the famous venture fund out of the US. They have over $1 billion invested in 70 companies in AI, of which 150 million is deployed in India. So that's 15%. So we'll see more of that. That's my sense.
Definitely, and thank you for this very expansive view, and I think your point on AI talent is a really big one, and I think the ones that really have the talent are also pushed away to other countries, right? So I think that's also the reason why maybe the adoption may a little bit slower, but also from a top funded AI startups that we see in India, I think most of them are building large language models, and I think the emphasis is really on the Indian languages, right? I mean, we talk about 300 different languages here, which is obviously a good thing that there's a need and there's a complementary opportunity to also build something for the local market, because at the end of the day, we still talk about 1.4 billion people in India, and that is very exciting. And then last but not least, I think despite that not so much money has gone into India, I think India still remains a very attractive and interesting place for new opportunities of growth, of VC funding. And I think this is something we will continue seeing. Great. Thank you guys so much for all your thoughts. I think today we spoke about the AI plus music industry. And I think the key question here is really, okay, is this industry going to find new business models? Will they find new ways of protecting their copyright, but at the same time also embracing the democratization of music? We spoke about Apple's closed ecosystem and also how Apple is integrating other players, third-party providers of AI capabilities within their ecosystem in an non-invasive way, and also not as a product or app, but rather really integrating into their different flows. And then last but not least, I think we spoke about a couple of news bits and snippets on Perplexity's infringement, or maybe not, we don't know. And also looking at a new market such as India. This was really fun. Thank you guys. And if you, the listener, liked our show today, please don't forget to follow us, to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see each other next time.